The bad news of the storm going slower is that could potentially have some negative impacts once it reaches landfall, but you do have time before it reaches to prepare if you have not done so. And so we urge all Floridians to have 7 days worth of food, medicine, and water. This is potentially a multi-day event where it will churn slowly across the state. That obviously creates a whole host of issues, but if you're in an area that has an impact from this storm, you should assume you're going to lose power. If you're in an area that flooded during Hurricane Irma and you're impacted by this, you should assume that you're going to see flooding again after this storm. So be prepared, and be prepared for potentially a multi-day event. Now, local officials are making determinations, I think, today about evacuations, whether to issue evacuations and how you're going to do those evacuations. We are just asking Floridians, please heed those directives from your local folks. They're considering a variety of factors and obviously monitoring the storm's path. And so those decisions are not made lightly. But if you're in an evacuation zone and you're ordered to evacuate, please do so. Put your safety first. Better to evacuate and then it not end up hitting you than to remain in there and end up being in jeopardy of loss of life. Know if you're in an evacuation zone, know which zone you're in and know your evacuation route. Now, in terms of our highways here, the Florida Department of Transportation has already cleared the shoulders of all our major highways like I-95 and I-75. And so they've been swept, cleared. We will open those shoulders for traffic once evacuation orders are handed down. As of right now, the DOT has not identified any abnormal traffic patterns, but obviously we know that once counties make determinations for evacuation orders, you're going to see people start to get on the road. Non-essential lane closures that reduce capacity throughout the state are being opened to deal with the storm. Fuel is an issue. There's gas stations that have run out of fuel. We, in the emergency declaration, waived service and truck rates for fuel trucks so that we can increase the capacity of fuel that's being brought in. We're also going to be, starting today, implementing Florida Highway Patrol escorts for fuel trucks so we can facilitate refueling in critical parts of the state. I mean, there's some parts of the state where you have major lines for gas, cars are lined up. It makes it more difficult for the trucks to get in and replenish the gas supply. So we think those escorts will help with that. We have a lot of fuel in Florida. It's just we have limited capacity to bring it from the port to the gas stations because you can only have so many trucks at one time doing that. And so recognizing that, we've worked with FEMA to get fuel from out of state. So FEMA and Jared have worked with Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia to waive their service and truck weights so we can facilitate fuel coming in from out of state. And so that is happening as we speak. In terms of these nursing homes, obviously that's been an issue in the past. The Agency for Healthcare Administration is making site visits or calls to all facilities where the state does not have updated info about generators. As you know, we now have a website through the Agency of Healthcare Administration where you can go in each county and see who's got the generators, who doesn't. And so we think it's statewide, about 120 that we don't have the information for. So there's going to be site checks, there's going to be phone calls to make sure that they have a plan to deal with folks that are in their care. And then once the storm passes, there'll be spot checks done in conjunction with the Department of Health to see where there may be needs after the storm and see who has lost power. The website for the ACA generator is just fl-generator.com. And so we've been putting that out to the local folks in our counties and the emergency offices there so that they have a sense of where they may need to offer assistance, and we encourage everyone to take a look at that. Today, at my direction, Volunteer Florida activated the Florida Disaster Fund, the official private fund established to assist Florida's communities as they respond to and recover during times of emergency or disaster. And to donate, please visit www.volunteerflorida.org or text disaster to 20222 to make a $10 contribution, and we appreciate that. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is preparing officers and resources for potential deployments in the coming days using a variety of specialized equipment, including shallow draft boats, ATVs, airboats, and four-wheel drive vehicles. Jared has also requested vehicles from the federal government that are able to navigate some potentially flooded streets, and obviously General Eifert is sensitive to that as well. I mean, you're looking at potentially significant water event, throughout major portions of the state, and so we want resources to be able to navigate that. There have been a number of school closures: Daytona State College, Eastern Florida State College, Indian River State College, Valencia College, Seminole State College, University of Central Florida, Florida Atlantic, Florida Polytechnic, Florida International, and the University of Central Florida have issued closures starting today through Tuesday. The school districts in Martin County and Volusia County have also announced closures for Tuesday, September 3rd. As you know, Monday is Labor Day, so the schools were scheduled to be closed anyways. Our Florida Department of Economic Opportunity is extending the deadline for local governments to submit applications for the $85 million Rebuild Florida Infrastructure Repair Program. And Visit Florida has activated the Expedia Visit Florida hotel accommodation web portal so that if there is evacuation orders, you can get a sense of what would be available in terms of accommodations. We have close to 1 million gallons of water. Jared has requested, I think, another 2 million for FEMA. We have almost 2 million meals ready for distribution. Now, we have not necessarily received requests for that yet, but we stand ready to distribute the meals when we can. And the state, and then we're also working with some of the retailers like Publix and Walmart, to make sure that their stocks are reshelved. We do not want them giving the state the water. We want that water going back on the shelves because a lot of people are preparing, which is good, but obviously the flip side of that is the water's going off the shelf and requires restocking in a quicker fashion. If you want up-to-date information on Hurricane Dorian, please visit floridadisaster.org/info. For local media updates and updates as we do. You can do my Twitter account. You can also do the State Emergency Response Twitter account, which is at FLSERT. And the state is also activating a toll-free hotline for Floridians to receive information, and that number is 1-800-342-3557. So this is a major event. We still have some degree of uncertainty, but I think if you look at the different forecasts, you see potential major impacts from places in South Florida, potentially going all the way up the coast of Florida. Some forecasts have it going through the center of the state. Similar to kind of what Irma did in terms of going up the middle. And you still have some forecasts that say it's going to go across the state and end up in the Gulf of Mexico. So we just got to be prepared for all those circumstances. I think the probabilities of all those are not necessarily equal, but it's much better to be prepared and then not have to face it than to go into one of these things unprepared. And finally, I did speak with the president on Wednesday night, and the administration has been great, and they've assured us they're going to provide all the resources we need. The president was scheduled to leave the country and has canceled that trip because I think the administration recognizes that this is a really, really serious event. And with that, we're happy to take some questions for myself or Jared or the general.
Governor, what's the status of the National Guard?
General Eifert,
Sure.
they're mobilizing.
We are mobilizing as we speak. We expect about 2,000 soldiers and airmen from the Florida National Guard mobilized by the end of the day today. By the end of the day tomorrow, it'll probably be doubled by about 4,000. We're trying to be responsive but not overzealous in implementing whatever requirements the Department of Emergency Management levies on us. So we're prepared to respond. We have 12,000 soldiers and airmen in the state, and every one of them that is able and in the state, not deployed, will be ready to step up as needed. In addition, we have emergency management assistance compacts with various states in the southern region especially to be able to fill in any voids that we have or gaps in our formations that might need specialties like aviation, engineering, high water vehicle transportation, and those kinds of things.
Governor,
And we also, the general's talking with other states. We anticipate getting support from other states. I know I spoke with the governor of Alabama, and she authorized some National Guard personnel from Alabama. So that is ongoing, and I'm sure we will provide those updates once we get them.
Governor,
Yes.
this is just an observation. I noticed there's a lot more FEMA personnel in the EOC, and obviously the trucks that were previously across the street at DFS are now right here in the parking lot. Is this a change on your part with the with the new administration, or is this just happenstance, or is it a new approach? I guess.
I think this is just what we planned, right? Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not exactly familiar in terms of how FEMA did in terms of where they were before I was here, but when we did the hurricane exercise, I mean, this is how we've anticipated it happening. And Jared has developed a really good relationship with folks in FEMA, and they really appreciate all the hard work he's doing. So I think we're on the same page, and I think we'll be able to work constructively together.
Governor, this is your first major hurricane as governor, and I'm wondering if there was much of a learning curve for you going into this, and do you see your political future sort of tied to how the state performs during this?
I don't view it politically at all. We're trying to protect the state, protect people, and assist these local folks who are out there. They're all activated now as best we could. I grew up in Florida, so I'm not a stranger to hurricanes. And of course, we've had a number of active hurricane seasons recently. As a U.S. congressman, we had Hurricane Matthew, where my district was the district that was most affected. Now, granted, that could have been worse than the path it ultimately took. And then obviously Hurricane Irma, that affected almost everybody in the state. And so, I have a lot of experience just understanding kind of how some of the wheels go in motion. And then we've done an awful lot with Hurricane Michael since I've taken office. And so this is something that we didn't want to see hurricane this season. I know Jared and I both did what we thought we could in different respects to try to head that off, but we also prepared for one and did a major hurricane exercise. I would ask Jared, hey, what's it look like in the Caribbean? What's this? Because we knew that this is something that could potentially happen. So at the end of the day, we're going to be working really, really hard to do our best to help the folks in the state of Florida.
What can you tell us about cell phone coverage and how long people should expect to go out? That was a big problem, at least for some providers, after Hurricane Michael, and that's what everyone's on and going to want to know about how their home.
Sure. Well, obviously, I think in Michael, it's a major problem, and it really hindered, I think, the ability for folks to be able to take protective measures after the storm. But we've spoken with companies like Verizon. They have a plan. They are implementing the plan. They recognize, the threat from the storm and are taking action. And so that's really, at the end of the day, these are private companies. What we've done, Jared's talked to him, I've talked to him, has said, look, the state really believes that having a plan and being able to take action to restore any lost service as quickly as possible is very important. Helps with the recovery efforts, helps with people whose livelihoods are at stake. And I think they all get that, and I think they recognize some of the problems in the past. And I would say the same with the utilities. I've met with a number of the heads of the utilities, companies like Florida Power and Light, and they are executing their plans. And you're seeing a lot of assets being brought to bear in Florida right now, not necessarily for sure where those are going to need to ultimately be deployed, but there's going to be a capacity to do that. And restoring the power once it goes out to as many people as quickly as possible, that helps Jared, me, it helps General, it helps with the recovery effort and the response. And so we're sensitive to that. And I can say that the utilities have plans. They are executing those plans. Resources are being brought to bear. And I think that's a responsible thing to do.
Governor, Facebook has started a new tool for first responders to alert communities in case of emergency. Do you have any idea if the state government or any of the local governments might be using this new tool?
I'll let Jared weigh in on that.
Governor, thank you. I don't know specifically about the Facebook new tool, but I know we're constantly using social media, all different aspects of social media, all different ways of communication. But I can get back to you specifically on the Facebook issue.
The gas is an issue every time we have a hurricane. And a consultant's report earlier this year recommended increasing the capacity at the terminals loading in the trucks. I mean, do you think that or other issues will seriously have to be addressed after this storm?
Well, let's just see. I mean, Jared and I have talked earlier this year about, do we want a state fuel reserve, and we've kicked around different ideas. But at the end of the day, we're utilizing the capacity we have here, and then we're going outside the state to increase the capacity now. And I think part of the reason why you've seen, I mean, Fort Myers is, I think they're at like 47% of the gas stations there, basically the same as Miami. And Miami, man, there were lines everywhere there. I think part of that is because I think people are taking steps to be prepared, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So we're doing all we can on the fuel. I understand it's something that's very sensitive to me because I remember running around with these hurricanes throughout my life, and that's something that people really want to see there. So the FHP is going to be escorting some of that fuel very shortly, and we hope that makes a positive impact.
People in tiny homes and tents in North Florida. I know the hurricane shows that they can get out into the Gulf. Should they just evacuate? What should those people do?
So that's going to be a determination with the local officials that they make as they monitor the storm. Obviously, a storm that cuts across the state, ends up in the Gulf of Mexico, then slams the Panhandle is a bad thing for us because of what you cite. I mean, you have blue tarps on a lot of these houses still in places like Bay County. And so having a major impact less than a year after Michael is something that we hope does not happen. It's still too soon to tell whether that's happening. And as I say, not every path of this storm has the same probability, but you got to be prepared for that. And I think those communities are going to have to make those decisions. Obviously, Jared, myself, when if we become convinced that there's a real threat there, we're certainly going to communicate that in there. But I think it's too soon to tell. But clearly that's that's a concern for us. And I think that's been a concern for us from the beginning. And there are also other parts. I mean, if you look at we were when our briefing today, Jared was outlining some of the areas in South Florida where you have more transient communities in different parts. And that is something that is a concern for us. And so you see that in places like Palm Beach County, in some of the interior parts. So fortunately, I think Palm Beach does a good job. But that is a concern when you have some of these storms hit like this.
Do you feel that the state is dropping?
Could you speak to the decision to move the FSU game rather than cancel it all outright?
Well, I think at the end of the day, Jacksonville wrestled with whether they wanted to play the game there. Moving it to Friday, they may have issued an evacuation order 3 hours before the game. So if you have a game in Jacksonville, how does that impact the evacuation of parts of Jacksonville or Duval County or other parts of the state? So I think that the mayor and the university officials, I think they made a good decision to do it. I think doing it Saturday, we're not anticipating impacts on this thing until sometime Sunday. So I think having it in Tallahassee, you can do the game, and I think people would still have the ability to get where they need to go. Obviously, this is an uncertain track, but I think the probabilities are that Jacksonville 95 area is going to be more likely to see a lot of people leaving than maybe over here and I-10. And so I think it was a good decision, and I think it'll make it easier for folks in Jacksonville to be able to manage whatever types of evacuations need to occur.
Are you looking to avoid the kind of big mass evacuation that occurred during Irma? Do you think that was a bad idea that just sort of told the state to get out of town?
Well, it's the type of thing where we want you, if you're in an evacuation zone, if you have an order come down, so if you're in Brevard County and they say evacuate the barrier islands, they're not going to do that lightly. I mean, they're doing that because they're anticipating really significant storm surge that can be life-threatening. They're anticipating massive amounts of flooding. And so we want you to heed those calls. But I think there's also the case of sometimes, if you evacuate too soon, you may evacuate into a path of the storm as it changes. And so these things are just, I think the counties are wrestling with this. The fact that the impacts are not going to happen as early as I think we initially anticipated means they're taking the time to kind of digest what that would mean and then making those decisions. And so you will see evacuations. I'm confident of that. But to just willy-nilly, tell every state, we're not going to be telling every county, tell everybody to leave, because that may create some problems as well. So, but I think it's really going to be determinative on some of the local issues and local factors. And it's interesting, if you look down the east coast of Florida, some of those barrier islands are much more vulnerable than other parts of the East Florida coast. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And so, you may have a quicker trigger on areas that really are potentially problematic. What we want to do at the state level is obviously assist the efforts. If there are evacuations, we're going to waive the tolls. We're going to open up the shoulders. We're going to do things to make that a more orderly process. And if we feel strongly that a local community is not acting in a way that makes sense, we will certainly let them know what we think. But at the same time, I really trust a lot of those local folks to really know, what's best for their communities, because this is not like this is their first rodeo at this point. I mean, we've had multiple seasons of this. I mean, a lot of people on the East Coast were concerned with Matthew. Irma concerned almost everybody, and so we're going to, we're going to tell people really focus on the news coming out of your local emergency officials.